I'm Mary Lyons, and I am the Wealth Woman.
And I'm Eric Alexander from Benchmark Income Group.
And this is the Big Wealth Podcast.
Everything you've ever been taught about money is wrong.
But don't worry, we're here to help.
On this podcast, we'll use the same tools you already know to actually help set you free.
Free to do what you want with your time, with your money, and with your energy. Free to live your life the way you have dreamt about.
So we're going to talk about wealth knowledge, personal reflections, and the financial industry news of the day.
Welcome to the Big Wealth Podcast. Today, we are going to continue our conversation from last time. So just to give you a quick summary of what we talked about last time, we discussed safe withdrawal rates and how the industry decides what to recommend to clients. And the conclusion that we came to is that if you want a greater than 90% chance of success, regardless of portfolio allocation, the best withdrawal rate that you can use is roughly 3%, give or take a little bit. So that means that for every $1 million that you manage to save up, congratulations, you get to spend $30,000 a year. So that's not particularly exciting. And we promised you last time that we would come back and give you some alternate solutions here and some ideas that you can take and use in your own life. So Eric, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, one of the things that we find over and over and over and over again is the first step in solving that problem is kind of thinking differently about your money, thinking differently about retirement and how you put it together. And it's one of my favorite Einstein quotes. He has a ton of them that I use, but this is one of my favorites. We can't solve problems using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. And I think that really gets to that idea of I've got to start thinking differently if I'm going to solve a harder problem. And so what I mean by that, and this is one of my favorite stories, is I remember a story when I was growing up, what I call the Black & Decker story, right? Black & Decker came in and they sold 10 million drills last year. I don't know how many drills Black & Decker sells, but they sold a lot of them. And they're going around and they're doing focus groups and why did you buy my drill and what feature did you like and what can we do better? And they figured out that 10 million people didn't buy a drill because they wanted a drill. 10 million people wanted a hole in the wall and they bought a drill to go get the hole.
Right.
And I think where the industry has kind of sort of botched this over the years is we've gotten so enamored with our performance, rate of return, all these kind of different things that we're looking for net worth. And we're conflating that net worth is equivalent to income, and it just isn't. I don't take net worth to the grocery store. I don't take net worth to pay my property taxes. I take income to pay my taxes. I take income to the grocery store. And I think that one subtle shift in the way we approach our dollars for a lot of our clients is the biggest aha they have in that first meeting is if I'm solving the income problem, then the net worth problem kind of takes care of itself.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right because, even just thinking about my own life, like I don't want a big giant pot of money for the sake of having a pot of money and it just sits there looking pretty and shiny. The reason that you want that money is because it should translate into lifestyle, right? And so you're absolutely right. I think the income has to be the biggest priority. And I do think that sometimes advisors get sort of myopically focused on net worth because there is a direct correlation between someone's investable net worth and the advisor's paycheck. And so if the advisor is thinking about how am I going to get paid, and they're thinking about, okay, this translates in fees to this dollar amount. And after I pay my assistant and my rent, here's what I get to take home. There's a reason that they're going to be focused on that. And I even find when I'm out and about in Dallas, back when, networking was a thing that people did pre-COVID, one of the questions that people would ask me really frequently was, what's your ideal client? And when I didn't respond with minimum net worth of and a number, they would always be like, well, that isn't what I was expecting, because the rest of my peers would say, well, my minimum account size is, right? And that's the beginning of the conversation. And so I do think there is sort of this dehumanization of, individuals and their lives and what they're trying to accomplish when the focus is solely on net worth. And I don't want to say it's irrelevant, But I do want to say that I 100% agree with you that income becomes much more important. And you know, the Einstein quote that you just used, I think is so key here, because it if thinking a certain way got you into a problem, and we know that the problem is that that 3% withdrawal rate really is not exciting, then we
Right.
have to begin to think differently about what we're doing in order to solve it. And so I think that is true also when you're looking at financial tools and financial vehicles. So
Right.
I would say that as a firm, the way we approach things, I would describe it as being product agnostic. I don't
Right.
care whether we're talking about an investment tool, real estate, you know,
Business.
life insurance, your business, annuities, whatever it may be. I
Right.
actually don't care what the tool is called. The only thing that I care about is what it does for me. And I also think that because we look at the whole world of what's available as opposed to just investments or just insurance, it changes the way we think about the tools themselves. And I'd like to use a golf analogy, even though I'm not really a golfer, but I did grow up in a household with some very avid golfers. And I think this kind of brings it home in a different way. So I want you to picture for a minute that you're standing on that first tee, and you're for the very first time, you've had some lessons, you're good to go, and you feel like, okay, I've got this. And you're standing on that tee, and a golf pro comes walking out, and he says, hey, Eric, I have this new club. I really think that you need to purchase this club right now, because it is going to be the best driver that you have ever used in your entire life. You want power? I got you. This club has got power.
Right.
All right. And look at how sexy it is. Look at this. It's great. And you're like, all right, I'll buy that club. So you spend your money, you buy the club, and you get up and you get all set and you swing as hard as you can, and the ball just goes dink right off the tee and rolls a little bit. And you look down at the club and you realize what you have been sold is a putter. So let me ask you a couple questions. If I just sold you that club, how do you feel about me as a golf pro?
Horrible. I want to fire you immediately. Right?
You might actually hit me with the club.
I'm swinging it at you next, right?
Yeah. So all my credibility is gone at this point. And how do you feel about the putter?
It's the worst thing in my bag. Like I'm checking it in the ocean. Let's first chance I can get.
Why would anyone ever buy this? It's a complete waste of space, right? So now we're going to fast forward. You're still on the first hole, right? And now you're on the green, and you've thrown that putter away, right? You've cursed everybody. The putter's gone, and you look in your bag and you have a bag full of drivers. How easy is it going to be for you to make your putt?
Right. You get no shot at it. You're doing Happy Gilmore. You're trying to line it up, right?
Exactly. You'd be better off shooting pool, right? With your golf,
right. Yeah, exactly.
Right, than using the driver, right? And so I think this is key, because a lot of times, you know, regardless of the tool that we're talking about, like I just want people to understand, your power club is going to be the investments. Your putter is going to be things like permanent life insurance, right? And so I think it's easy for people to say and rule out particular tools because they're like, well, that's just bad, right? And the reality is that maybe the person who introduced them to it didn't have the education or the knowledge to say, like, here's how you should actually be using this tool. So I think as part of this conversation, as we are being agnostic about what's out there, I think it's important for us to make sure that we kind of lay that mindset, right? And that's a shift in thinking, because what we're really saying is there is no inherently good or bad financial tool. Some are certainly better than others. But when we look at this, it's how we use them that determines
it's context.
Right.
Yeah, so, every tool is great till it's not.
Right. And I think one of the things that's really important here is that if you are working with an advisor who is really just a club salesman and they're just selling you some products, you are missing out, because what you really need is someone who is going to be a swing coach who will help you understand how to swing the club and then which club is appropriate to play at which time. And so with that in mind, I kind of want to, you know, hand this back over. There's a Ben Franklin quote, which I love, which is, the doors of knowledge are never shut. And I'm just going to say that may be true, but I do think sometimes as individuals, once we've taken a look at something and we've made a decision, we close those doors and we are no longer open-minded for certain solutions. And so I think it's really important here to keep an open mind and understand that anything that we talk about, we can back up with data. And will do in situations where we have the context of someone's situation. So I'm gonna hand that back over to you, because at this point, what we're going to talk about is a concept that we like to call the market shock absorber.
Right.
So with that awkward transition, you take it away.
I think she shot that to me with the driver, but I'll catch it and we'll get it going. So the market shock absorber is really one of the solutions to that 3% problem. If I've got bags of cash, whether the bag is $1 million or 2 million, and I'm stuck at a 3% distribution rate, life is not what I dreamed it would be. Congratulations, you get $1 million, you get to spend 30, go get them, right? You can do, as I watched somebody get up on stage, he said, somebody just handed me a note and the note says, you probably got this, right? I think that's your post-it note. You walk into retirement, we say, you probably got this. So to make sure it's better than a probably got this, one of the things you've got to go do, because you typically need more than 3%, is if you can add in what Mary just introduced, this idea of a shock absorber that says, hey, when the market's great, when everything's going well and we're getting double-digit or better rates of return, then go take from the market. The market is giving, take, right? The challenge in a sequence and return environment, and the reason it's so low at 3%, is that when you have a down year, when the market is not giving, but it's taking, then when you go pull money out to go live on, because we've all discovered that Alpo is a really poor substitute to stake, right? We keep pulling cash to go live on, is we've made a bad situation infinitely worse. And so a little bit of a loss becomes a big loss. And then as the market's trying to recover, you keep trying to feed your face again, which I don't know why we keep doing it. And we make a recovery worse because we never let it grow. Right. So what the shock absorber comes in and does, it says, let's go to another account that's not correlated. That's off to the side. It doesn't have the same risk profile. Completely separate, right? And when my market account drops, I've got somewhere else to go pull cash in. And while I'm using that to go buy stake in Alpo, I'm letting this other account regrow and recover. And then when the market's great again, I'm going to put that other account on the side. I'm going to go back to the market. So it allows me to disrupt this concept that says, I only have one bucket to pull from. And because I only have one bucket, it's 3%.
Right. So I'm gonna use an analogy for that, just for our listeners that maybe aren't quite so technical. I am married to a man, my clients, he's wonderful. And he is that's my little plug for my spouse right there, but he's a power lifter. And he has been for quite some time. And we have a gym in our garage. And you're wondering where I'm going with this, but I promise it's relevant. When I think about it, if he goes out there and I'll just use biceps because it's easy, and he's working his biceps, right? And he is just picking up the heaviest weight. I mean, I probably can't even pick it up with 2 pounds with both hands, right? And he's doing curls. If he just keeps doing that and he hits muscle fatigue. So when you think about what happens when somebody works out, you start tearing down muscle, right? That's what you're doing. You're tearing the muscle down. Right. And so if you just keep doing that beyond muscle fatigue and your muscles are torn down and you just keep going and going and going and you don't take a break, what happens to your muscles, right? At some point, you can damage them irreparably if you keep doing that. And so when you think about what someone does when they're really trying to build muscle, is they will tear the muscle down and then they give it a break so that it has time to recover. And if they're doing it right over time, there's even the possibility that muscle will get bigger and stronger, right? Not a guarantee, but at least it's there. And so when I think about what happens with the market, the concept is really the same. When someone's in retirement and they're taking withdrawals from their portfolio, what they're really doing is they're tearing down their portfolio because they're taking the money out. And so when you have that systematically happening, and then the market also is taking a loss, you're really putting yourself into that position where there is no real recovery period, because as the market starts to recover, if you are withdrawing the bulk of that recovery, then it isn't actually getting you back to your initial starting balance. And so this idea of the shock absorber, I think, becomes so important because we don't know what's going to happen in the market. And so if you have this side account that has some guarantees or some stability attached to it, you can go back and forth. And And what I think is key here is that this strategy is not about predicting what's going to happen in the market.
Right.
It's about responding to it. So when you take a loss and you see, okay, I started with $1 million and now I've got 800,000 and I just took out income, instead of continuing to take out income from that portfolio, you just pause, right? Because you have an alternate source. So
Right.
How much money needs to be in that alternate source, Eric?
That is the magic question. So if you think about the compound interest curve, like we're all very excited about watching the little number grow and little number grow, and then all of a sudden we get this explosion of growth, right? The sort of the hockey stick on
the back end.
Right. We love the hockey stick. But if you think about it and you just mirror that over, the hockey stick, where the biggest part of your account is also the day after you retire. The biggest part of your account is the day before you retire. The biggest part of your account is the day after you retire, right? But now you get no more money coming in. So that it's really, really important to preserve as much of that as you can, because when you're 65 or 70, the account's the biggest it's going to be. And you've got the longest time to go before you have your folding chair accident, before you graduate the planet, right? Whatever the euphemism is, right? And so the real key is really trying to protect that first half of retirement from really big market drops. So I'm a big fan, and there's data both ways, but I'm a big fan of probably 8+ years of buffer. So if I'm pulling out 100K.
Yeah, say that with real numbers.
Yeah. So if I'm pulling out real numbers, so if I'm pulling out 100K every year, because I can do boring dumb math, right?
Yeah.
Then I need about $800,000 in that side account in order to buffer 8 years of the market being bad.
So I don't know what this means, but internally in my head, I just went, whoa, 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 right? Because when you think about what's happening, what you're saying, right, is that I need to have 8 years of income sitting in an account that doesn't have any risk.
Right.
Right. So, and that's predictably stable. And I'm going, who's going to actually do that? Because I'm not keeping that much money in cash. That seems wasteful.
Right.
I need that upside return, right? Because we're used to thinking about it in terms of growth, right? As opposed to preservation. And I think understanding that it really takes that understanding of volatility, right? You take a loss, then you withdraw, you make it worse. And as it tries to recover, you withdraw the recovery. That's why you have to have that alternate source there. But, what type of accounts can you even do that with?
Right. Because nobody in their right mind, because one of the things I find over and over again is that there may be a number that's the technical right number, but then there's an emotional number when your brain goes, nope, I'm not doing that, right? Because nobody's keeping 800
grand in cash, right? No, not if I'm used to living off of 100 grand a year. That's wow.
It just seems silly, right? Because your brain starts to go into, but you know what else I could have done with that money over that same time frame? Like you start getting into loss aversion, right? Which is why it's an interesting concept.
Well, even just thinking about opportunity cost, what else could that money be doing? And so, my initial inclination thinking about, okay, where can you keep that much liquid that's going to be stable is a checking or savings account. But I think about what can you get in interest in an interest-bearing account today. It's not a whole lot. Yeah.
The number starts with a 0 point something. Right.
Yeah, I don't like that idea. So what's option 2?
Yeah, so option 2 is really kind of a bond portfolio. You get some of the mitigation from equity risk. So you're not worried about what Apple or Google or Netflix is doing that day, whether they're up or down. You're not trying to go figure out if GameStop is going to make it all the way to $5 million in 5 minutes, right? But you've got some of that mitigation. And you've got some of the yield along the way. Now, you're not yielding probably 30% out of your bond portfolio, but you're getting some growth. So it feels better than a checking account. The challenge with the bond portfolio is that you're at risk for interest rate fluctuation. So you've got some volatility. It's a little bit less, but that's people's typically first go-to for that secondary account.
Right. But you still have some risk there, right? Some risk exposure. So option number 3, and you feel free to introduce others if you can think of them as well.
Right.
But option number 3 is a very specific type of permanent insurance. And I want to be really clear about this, that not all types of permanent insurance are created equally. In fact, most of them I would never consider owning myself. But if
Right.
you look at a plain vanilla, old school, whole life insurance policy from a mutual insurance carrier, and so when you think about what happens from a retirement perspective, if you can keep your cash earning at maybe somewhere between 4 and 6%, which is what you see if you look at 100-year returns from good mutual insurance carriers,
Right.
then you can have that stability and make sure that you still have some yield. The only real problem is you can't wait until you retire to look for it, because then the cost structure doesn't work anymore.
Right.
So, you know, I always feel like in situations like this, do we tell them what could potentially work? Because I know that people are going to go, oh, I heard that's bad, right? That's why I think there's the importance of that story at the beginning about the putter versus the driver. This is your putter. We're not trying to make it into a driver, right? It's going to be very conservative. But when you think about that, you know, initially the first thing that my brain goes to, and that we talked through when we were exploring the strategy, is that if you have to, even at a young age, divert money away from the market into a life insurance policy. And let's be clear, it's not one or the other. There is a very specific amount of coverage that you need in order to get this strategy to an optimal place, right? You can have way too much and you can have way too little, and then there's just right. It's a very Goldilocks kind of equation here.
I feel like eating porridge right now.
Yeah, but if you do that, that means you have less money earning for you in the market, and you're giving up the possibility for much higher returns, doesn't it? So
well, that's the mindset shift that is such a hard thing to break, right? Because we're taught to think net worth. And if you think back through, I've lost track on how many of these we've done now, but I think one of the first 2 or 3 podcasts we did, we talked about that 3-legged stool. For decades and decades and decades, the whole focus of the financial advisor was net worth, because the pension was taken care of by the company you work for, Social Security was government. So our only job was net worth. Like we thought, we trained, we marketed all around net worth. And as those things have gone away, as an industry, we're slow with it, but we've had to start thinking through, I can't just think about net worth anymore. I've got to think about income, and it's a much different problem.
Well, I think too, I mean, going back to your analogy about tools earlier, because we do both the investment and the insurance side of things. You know, if the only tool I have is a hammer, every problem I have starts to look like a nail. But sometimes what you need is a screwdriver, because the problem you have is screw, right? And so when you start looking at this, I think there's an appropriate place for each thing. And, you know, when it comes down to it, even if I have slightly less money in the market, I'm still going to have some assets in the insurance contract, right? And if I get to change my distribution rate from 3% to 6 or 7%, even if I have a smaller asset base, I'm still going to see an increase in the amount of income that I get to spend. And this is where, as we're talking to clients, one of the things that we talk through is the importance of what is it that you want? Because if you just want a giant pot of gold, that is a very different strategy than if you were trying to maximize or optimize the income that you get to spend over your lifetime. And one of the things that actually I learned from Jason Sanger, who helped create a software program that we use called Wealth Building Cornerstones, is that money really acts like a waterfall. And so when you think about what that means, if you focus on maximizing or optimizing income, if somebody has more income than they actually need, that's going to waterfall down into liquidity. And then eventually that will waterfall down into legacy. And so what I think is, even though the initial goal when we're building a plan is not, hey, let's make sure the kids get all our money, right? We've all seen the bumper sticker that says, I'm spending my kids' inheritance. But what's interesting is when you focus on optimizing income or generating as much income as you can, given the resources that you have, a byproduct of that is not only that you get to spend more money, it's also that you get to leave more behind to the people and the causes that you care about. And that's sort of an accidental consequence of the way the math works out when we're focused on maximizing the income in the first place. And I think that in and of itself is pretty cool, because, you know, ultimately, when people first come in and talk to us, it seems like their primary concern is, am I going to be okay? And then when they're actually retired and they see the strategies working, the part of the plan they're usually the most excited and proud about is what they get to do for the people that they will eventually be leaving behind. And so I think that's pretty awesome. Is there anything else you want to add to that discussion? Because I think we're coming up on time.
Yeah, no, we're coming up on time. But to your point about the sort of the most exciting thing that they come to find is that legacy piece. You know, the joke we always give is that just like on an airplane, if the oxygen mask falls, put the oxygen mask on you first before you put it on your kid, right? And so we want to make sure that the parents are taken care of. But it's, to your point, it's really, really interesting watching their mindset shift, again, their brain shift to, okay, I'm good. I'm resting in this place of like peace and comfort and everything's going to be okay. And then so all of a sudden it's like, now what can I do for everybody else? They start thinking about churches and charities and kids. And it's like, you see their brains open up about what else they could do with their lives. And it becomes this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Now, I've got food, I've got clothing, I've got shelter, everything's good. What else can I go do now?
Now right? I can self-actualize.
I can self-actualize, right?
Yeah.
And that, to me, it's the joke in our industry, the joke in the office is 50% of my job is math, and the other 50% is the human being, where it's marriage counseling or
therapy, yeah,
right. But it's watching them go through that mindset shift and go, oh, I didn't know I could do both. Like their brains explode just a little bit. And for me, outside of doing the math, because I love solving the problems, and I love, even if they don't do anything, I'm just excited I solved a cool problem. But the really, really cool part is watching them sort of come alive on that other end of, wow, I can do that too. And that's cool.
I think that is probably the most powerful part of what we do. So just to summarize really quickly, it is not one or the other. It is, let's take a look at all the tools available and find ways to create a shock absorber for the times that the market is not doing as well, or that interest rates are low and not producing. And there are ways that you can do that by using a complementary suite of products. Now, how much you implement and when you implement those things, I think becomes very important. And I'm going to go back to that Goldilocks analogy. Too hot, too cold, there is a just right. And that is going to vary from person to person. But I do want to reiterate that this really is about using the combination of tools that are available to you and making sure that you are using them in the appropriate way in order to optimize the income that you get to spend, as opposed to just buying a club and not really understanding how to swing it. So on that note, I'll just tee up the next one. We're going to give you a second solution in our next podcast. Right. So stay tuned, because that will be coming up next. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks. Bye.